Can you spare a minute to tell me what we're doing?
We find ourselves back in Perth and it's another hot day, surprisingly enough. And we are here to interview John Hancock, Gina Rinehart's firstborn son. He does have some constraints in what he can talk about, but we're hoping to have a chat to him about his life as a Hancock.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the exhausting bit is rehashing it in my mind before you arrive. I've got to bring up all this painful stuff. These were major events in my life, you know, being told you're going to be bankrupt. You know, that's a pretty major thing to deal with.
I sit down with John at the apartment he's staying at near Cottesloe Beach. He's back in Australia just temporarily to renew his passport. These days, the only place he sees his mother, Gina Rinehart, is in the courtroom.
And we didn't speak then.
Your relationship now is what?
Non-existent. We're not even emailing.
Do you remember the last positive interaction you had with Gina?
I had dinner introducing a business project that I had must have been 20 years ago, or close to 20 years ago. We had a nice dinner. Actually, we had a chuckle. I don't know why it came up, but we both ate lamb's brains. It was just one of those funny things that you remember.
And you know her, I assume, better than most people. How would you describe her personality?
She can be extremely engaging and funny and, you know, a lovely person. She can be very warm. But then there's another side to her. And anyone that has faced that knows about it.
And what does that side look like?
Well, I'd bring up the childhood images of her being angry. So not very pleasant, basically. You know, I mean, everyone has different sides. And I think just that ice of being able to completely disassociate with something as if it's not happening. And she can do that easily.
From Guardian Australia, I'm Sarah Martin, and this is Gina, a podcast series about Australia's richest person and the ongoing legal stoush with her children that could threaten the foundations of her empire.
Lang described Gina as tougher than any man he knew.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And only qualify that I think that it's almost like that disassociative ability. I guess that's mental toughness, but I think that being able to just have no feeling on what you might be doing to someone else, I think personally that is tough. Like, I don't think I could be that tough either. She probably would have been a great soldier or something. Whatever's in her way is just obliterated without further thought.
This is episode 4, The Firstborn Son.
This is a personal question, but have you had to have therapy, or have you seen a psychologist at all?
No. I don't deny a glass of wine will help me through some of the stress. But, you know, I think you've got to maintain a lot of mental strength when you're in a battle as big as this and against the forces that are against me. I think you've got to be emotionally open and having friendships, and I've got to actually really thank my wife, who has stood by me from the hardest moments, really. We've been together more than 20 years. Without her, I would, I'm sure, be needing a therapist. No doubt, yeah, things could have gone. Yeah, I've been under a lot of pressure.
Last episode, you heard John Hancock speak about his happy childhood and a closeness with his mother, Gina Rinehart. He says he was 15 years old when that started to change.
I went away to school to the US, and that was it. Having a mother, that basically sort of ended then.
This is not long after Gina has 2 children with her new husband, Frank Rinehart, Hope and Ginia.
She focused on the other ones. She was busy, but it was fine. She still wanted to control what I was doing and had what I thought was a pathway for me in the business, which I'd followed. And I went to university and did all these things and came back and worked in the company.
Had you always expected that you would be, I guess, the heir apparent to Hong Kong?
Yeah. I mean, that's what Lang had told me. Gina, for many years, gave me that impression. And it's sort of the natural order of things, isn't it? I would hope, being the firstborn son.
While Gina was engaged in a very bitter legal dispute with her stepmother, Rose Porteous, John was often seen by her side. We looked at those events in episode 3.
You can look at all the media. I was a big proponent of Gina in the Rose versus Gina fight, which is what the press called it. That was the headlines all the time. And I'd always come out on my mum's side, which to me there was no question about anyway. I could have done nothing. I took that upon myself to protect her and the media, spend that time with journalists or, trying to get that position across.
But then in 2003, the litigation between Gina and Rose that had dragged on for a decade came to an end. John is in his 20s and he remembers his mother telling him that he needed to sign a settlement agreement with Rose. He says he didn't know why.
Very shortly after that, matter of days, she then said to me, "John, you're not needed anymore." And I'm like, "What?" And it was because she didn't need me anymore. She needed my signature on that document.
So how did she sack you?
That was it. And then
Put you into a room or how?
I had walked into her office. Then, it all started happening. Like I didn't get the company salary anymore. My finger scan to get into the office was removed.
Are you aware of anything you did or that you were accused of doing that soured things that made Gina take that decision?
I was in my early 20s. I liked to be with friends and have fun and all those sorts of things. I think that she was wanting a very, for lack of a better word, boring person who would come to the office with a briefcase at 8 a.m, sit behind a desk and do nothing, just shuffle papers or something to make it look like there was something going on here, and then leave, be the last one out the door because that's very important, and do that day after day. And
But you actually wanted something to
yeah,
do.
I wanted something to do, and I'm entrepreneurial myself in the aspect Lang was, and try and get something going, try and get in there and make it work. And there was nothing like that being offered for me. Sure, it was a salary and I was existing and helping my mum through the Rose litigation, all the rest of it. So I think she probably just had a vision of someone she could puppeteer that didn't have any of their own opinions, that would just sit there and shuffle papers and not really be a part of anything.
Did you fight with her over this?
Of course, we had occasional fights about probably all sorts of different things. I do remember asking her to be part of the real management meetings, because there'd be times where I would be in my mother's office or something, and then she'd be like, "John, time for you to go, please." And I'd be like, "Well, why? What's going on now?"
So how did that make you feel?
Well, I guess a bit angry. It would have been fine if she'd said, "Well, I don't need you anymore, but here's another business, or here's some money to go start on your own thing, and you can have guidance and everything else," and that would have been fine. But I think she just thought she didn't want to give me any money. I think when she's rid of someone, they just fall away. It doesn't matter. I don't think it would have concerned her for a second about what I would then do. I knew, obviously that there's plenty of money around, certainly enough to survive on. I had no assets. I was a young, early 20s, had a girlfriend at the time, And that relationship dissolved, a number of reasons, but I'm sure that was part of it. So it was a difficult moment, and I didn't have anyone within the company that I could talk to. They were all told, don't talk to John. And then that was what started me on the process of I'm young and broke, and I'm like, well, I must be entitled to something. I knew that there was this Hope Margaret Hancock Trust.
And it's at this point in 2004 that John, for the first time, starts raising questions about his inheritance. It's the start of a series of legal proceedings that are still ongoing.
I started sort of agitating about what the situation was and slowly started discovering more and more.
Gina Rinehart's life has been defined in large part by litigation, disputes over who is entitled to the revenue from Lang Hancock's mining assets. In the 90s, it was with Rose Porteous. But since the 2000s, she has been fighting litigation brought by her children and by the family of Lang's former business partner, Peter Wright, among others. By 2011, Gina and her children are in court over the trust that John mentioned before, the Hope Margaret Hancock Trust. That trust has a valuable chunk of Hancock prospecting shares set aside for Lang's grandchildren, a little bit less than a quarter of the company. And I know it's very complicated, but for those wanting as sort of simple as possible an explanation, can you explain what the purpose of the trust was and who it was for?
So the trust was established to hold a portion of my grandmother's shares for the 4 children. Established by agreement between Lang and Gina about how the company shareholding would go.
It's set to vest when the youngest grandchild, Ginia, turns 25. That would happen in September 2011. So as that day approaches, the grandchildren are all expecting to receive their inheritance, billions of dollars worth of Hancock prospecting shares. But then,
3 days before the vesting, all the children received a letter.
The letter, sent at Gina's direction, suggests that if the trust were to vest as planned, the grandchildren would face bankruptcy due to an enormous capital gains tax bill.
And the only alternative was to sign a document that my mum had created.
It goes on to suggest that Gina, as trustee, could push the vesting date out, delaying their inheritance but saving them from the crushing tax. If the children make commitments not to challenge her authority over the trust and to exclude their partners from ownership claims in the family businesses. But also the consequence of this was that none of the grandchildren would be receiving funds from the trust.
If we had all signed it, and I didn't, but if we had, and if we disobeyed one of her little things in there, then yeah, she could exclude one or all of us from it until we rectified the breach. I smelt a rat immediately. Logically, you'd think if there was some problem with CGT, any rational person would deal with it like a year before and bring all the parties together and say, hey, we've got this issue. How do we solve it? Or because bankruptcy is not an option, is it? So getting landed with that 3 days before was a red flag for me.
John contacts the tax office for a ruling.
And they confirmed my suspicion that there would be no CGT, zero, on the trust vesting. So it was a pressure play. Certainly once we found out that there was no CGT payable, Hope, Bianca and myself applied to remove Gina as trustee of the trust.
Ah, yes, the ongoing saga of Gina Rinehart versus her children.
Gina Rinehart's only son, John, once her loyal ally, is now in a brutal battle with his mother.
Within days, they launch legal action.
What is the purpose of the action you and your sisters are currently taking?
Well, we're seeking to remove my mother as trustee and get access to the records of the trust.
They call into question their mother's role as trustee, alleging as part of their claim that she has acted deceitfully and with gross dishonesty in her dealings with the trust. Gina, the youngest, is not part of the claim and sides with her mother, who has always denied these allegations.
Gina, who sided with her mother, today she added, "This case has been nothing but a destructive display of greed, jealousy and a selfish sense of entitlement on behalf of my siblings."
Now, just on the billionaire, so Gina Rinehart, of course, has got this very public family squabble over dividing up their extraordinary wealth. Now, Barnaby Joyce got involved and sent a letter to the kids saying they should back off.
In 2011, Barnaby Joyce, a friend of Gina's and at that time the Agriculture Minister, writes from his parliamentary email to John's sister, Hope. It urges her to drop the case.
Before it gets really out of hand, I would try to get it back in-house and out of public view. Newspapers and lawyers get people to say nasty things.
I know because I am a public figure that if you can give some people some advice about that, then maybe that's what you should do. Obviously failed miserably, that's life.
What did you make of her relationship with Barnaby Joyce?
Well, I was very disappointed in Barnaby as a federal politician to get involved with our family dispute. I think that was a disgraceful thing to do. I think Barnaby has put himself in some silly positions that I can't say I'm surprised that he's found himself in, because the lack of judgment to do that is extreme.
In 2012, Gina actually steps down as trustee, but her suggested replacement is also challenged by the children. In 2013, Hope walks away from the case after taking a $45 million loan from Hancock Prospecting. But John and Bianca press on.
But we're very fortunate, thanks to the vision of my grandfather, and through this case we hope to bring effect to his true wishes.
We didn't find out the true depth of the subterfuge till years later, and that's when we got documents that showed the background, the genesis of that letter that we received 3 days before the trust was to vest.
The case goes to trial, and in 2015, a judgment is made.
The billionaire Gina Rinehart has lost her long-running legal battle to retain control of her family's trust.
The New South Wales Supreme Court has appointed Gina's eldest daughter, Bianca, trustee of the Hope Margaret Hancock Trust, valued at more than $4 billion.
The judgment is critical of Gina's behaviour when she was trustee. It notes that her and her chief financial officer, prior to sending the letter to the children, had been advised that capital gains tax would not necessarily be payable on the inheritance.
There was a couple of smoking guns where people knew that there was not going to be any CGT payable.
It also says that Mrs. Rinehart had manipulated a consultancy firm to get advice to suggest it would.
And these are complicated situations, but when they know and it's still allowed to go in, then that's disgraceful.
The judgment also revealed that after sending that letter, Gina had gone ahead and changed the vesting date of the trust to 2068 without telling her children. This meant that now the trust wouldn't vest until Gina turned 81. John Hancock would be 92 years old.
The judgment is scathing of the family matriarch. Justice Paul Brereton writes that he's never seen so much pressure brought to bear on a litigant as that which Gina Rinehart applied to her children.
The judgment also says that it had become clear throughout the proceedings that Gina had gone to extraordinary lengths to maintain control, directly or indirectly, of the trust. And she had exerted enormous pressure and great influence to do so. And that Gina, in the course of litigation, has, quote, repeatedly, directly, or through her lawyers or through other influential connections, sought to deter the plaintiffs from prosecuting it by measures some of which closely approach intimidation.
Are you getting any money from the trust that was set up for you at the moment?
No, and I haven't for many years.
A lot of people would find that frankly hard to believe.
Well, it'd be nice if I was, but I have all the bad things about having money and none of the good things.
The Australian Financial Review currently estimates John Hancock to be worth $2.7 billion based on his expected inheritance of Hancock Prospecting shares. This would make him the 50th richest Australian. And while most of the disputed wealth remains locked in the trust for now, John still receives about $1 million a year in dividends from Hancock Prospecting. He says this barely covers his legal bills.
I think I'm very fortunate because I grew up in a very different way.
While the litigation was ongoing, Gina Rinehart gave a rare interview with the ABC in 2012. She pulled no punches regarding her children.
And I think when you grow up, cement floors, tin roofs, having to immerse yourselves, understanding properly, the importance of work, I think these are benefits that I've had. So I think that, they say that if you give your children too much, they don't get the joy out of work. They just want the unearned things to keep falling from the sky. So I think that, I've been the fortunate one.
The comments to the media, oh, my children are all useless, or whatever it was, and they're incapable of running the company, and they just expect money from the sky. I think through my business career and even this conversation, hopefully it comes across that I'm not useless, and my successes in the business world have demonstrated that I've got some understanding of the mining industry and making investments, which is essentially what she does.
Did you know the team behind the Gina series also make a daily news podcast? It's called Full Story. If you want analysis of the most important stories of the week, then you can find it wherever you're listening to Gina right now. Just search for Full Story.
Despite running for years and pitting children against mother, the resolution of the court case over the trust only served to set the scene for something much larger, a leviathan of a dispute with more than 20 associated parties, including, again, Gina's children, something that is still running through the court system. And that has the potential to knock the foundations out of Gina Rinehart's empire.
We're claiming an account of the profits attributable to Hancock Prospecting.
So we're talking multi-billions of dollars.
Yes.
Can you quantify that for us?
I think it's publicly available information, but yeah, many, many billions.
Part of the case revolves around Hope Downs, Gina's joint venture mine with Rio Tinto. It was originally brought against Hancock Prospecting by the family of Peter Wright, Lang's longtime business partner, and others who claim the spoils of Hope Downs should have been shared with them. Hancock Prospecting denies this, as do Bianca and John, who in 2016 were drawn into this case as defendants by a judge in the WA Supreme Court. They say they have a claim on those spoils, which in turn Gina Rinehart denies, having been also drawn into the case as a defendant. Obviously, this is all very complex and involves a whole heap of different claims, counterclaims, and allegations. Some of what the children are alleging even goes all the way back to events that were happening in 1992, when Lang was trying to deal with the communist dictator of Romania.
And Lang wanted to go into some high-risk mining deals. The dictator at the time was Ceausescu. My mother was very against this idea, and with good reason. I definitely understand her reservations and thought process about that.
If you remember, Lang had undertaken to develop an iron ore mine to supply Romania, but he actually didn't start the development process for that mine in Hancock Prospecting. He started it in the name of another company. John alleges he did this as an insurance scheme, so that if the deal went wrong, the precious royalty stream from Rio Tinto would be safely housed in Hancock Prospecting and remain unaffected. But this proposed mine for Romania wasn't the only thing in this company. It also contained some other mining assets as well, including the tenements for Hope Downs. John says that Lang intended to leave this company and its mining assets to the grandchildren. But when Lang died and Gina took over, they were moved instead into Hancock prospecting, where they were further developed. John alleges that by doing this, Gina received a benefit to the detriment of the grandchildren. She actually acted in the interest of HPPL.
Yes.
In which
Yes.
she had the financial interest.
Yes. She owned 51% of Hancock Prospecting.
Your legal case claims that Gina Rinehart fraudulently took those mining assets that were later developed.
Yes. This was all while she was also trustee of our interests. And there's a law that says that a trustee can never benefit to the beneficiary's detriment.
Hancock prospecting lawyers deny this on a number of grounds, including that she was just moving them back to where they always belonged and was righting her father's wrongs. The company's lawyers allege that by moving the projects to these other companies in the first place, Lang actually breached his duties to Hancock prospecting. They say he did this to his own benefit and to sustain his lavish lifestyle with his wife, Rose. Did we talk about the claim? Like as in the Roy Hill claim? And can you talk about that or not? The billions of dollars in profits from Hope Downs are not all that's at stake in these proceedings, because John and Bianca are also trying to claim profits from Gina's crowning achievement, Roy Hill. They allege that their grandfather Lang had again wanted the children to receive the benefit of the mining assets related to Roy Hill. But like Hope Downs, they were moved into Hancock prospecting by Gina.
It was something that my grandfather obviously wanted, and he was wanting it for the future of the grandchildren.
Again, Gina says she was just righting her father's wrongs by moving them.
When you see the Roy Hill story online, as it is now, perhaps if I just read it to you, it says 1992, this is Gina Rinehart assumed chairmanship following the passing of her father, Mr. Hancock.
John also claims that there is a part of the Roy Hill story that remains untold. The official story, the one on Gina's website, royhill.com.au, today doesn't mention something that he claims is important, which is that there is evidence Lang Hancock had taken steps towards developing Roy Hill before he died.
Because the way that is presented is that it was her project that she developed after Lang's death.
I've seen that. It's irrefutable that there was an application. All the government stamp paperwork is there. It's been filed in court. That was in 1991. So the application for Roy Hill happened during Lang's lifetime. Subsequently, sometime in 1992, the department rejected that application and another application was issued using the exact same wording.
That application was made by Hancock Prospecting. It was accepted.
And what is this? Can you tell us about this document?
This is a memorandum to Gina, 22nd of May 1992, 2 months to the day of my grandfather's passing.
John points to a memo that has been tendered in court. It's sent from the then CEO of Hancock Prospecting to Gina shortly after Lang died.
And it contains a map of the Pilbara showing the location of various tenements. Has a reference saying application lodged 29th of August 1991. So it's about 8 months before Lang passed. And the tenements it refers to as application lodged are Mulga Downs East, Warrie, Roy Hill and Lynn Peak.
John says this application, which is for an exploration licence, shows that Lang knew and the company knew at this time that Roy Hill was a project worth pursuing.
Obviously, it was my grandfather's understanding of the region and his desire for that Roy Hill area. So I think that should be mentioned on the Roy Hill story, that it was applied for during my grandfather's lifetime.
When you see that extraordinary wealth coming from that project, how does that make you feel?
I'm very happy for everyone, for the workers that get their salaries, for the Australian government has billions of dollars of royalties from it. It's my grandfather's dream that was carried on by my mother to establish a Hancock mine. And certainly when I do see those sort of profit numbers, and especially given the history of the tenement, to pay nothing to the children is disgraceful, really.
On a personal level, and obviously I know this is, caught up in litigation, how does that feel?
It just goes against what anyone would expect a mother to want for their children. And I know the way I am with my children, anything I can do to help them or that's advantageous to them, I would do my best to do. And when there's someone in a position of such great wealth and then refuses or does the opposite, says negative things about their children in the media, denies them what their grandfather wanted for them, denies ones that disagree with her, but then benefits the ones that agree with her, I think that's very wrong. I think if you dealt with all the pain that my mother's given me over the years, you wouldn't be able to live life. You've got to try and forget about it. I think if you dwell on it too much, what she's done and the years it's gone on for, I don't think that's a very good place to be.
Guardian Australia stresses that John and Bianca's allegations are denied by Gina Rinehart and, pending judgment, remain unproven. The judgment in the WA Supreme Court is expected before the end of June. There have already been more than 50 court judgments between the 23 parties since the action began, and whatever the outcome, appeals are likely. Justice Jennifer Smith, the third judge to preside over the lawsuit, has been quoted as saying she expects the litigation life to exceed her own. A separate but related confidential arbitration between Gina and the children in the federal court is still ongoing. That arbitration is also considering some of these matters, including how much of Hancock prospecting the grandchildren are entitled to. Guardian Australia reached out to Gina Rinehart and Hancock Prospecting for comment. We received a response from their lawyers, which we've had read out by a voice actor.
The parties are expecting judgment shortly, and for obvious reasons, our client is unable to comment on matters that are currently before the court. In our view, the responsible approach, and one in accord with both fair and balanced reporting, would be to await the publication of that judgment before giving any further airtime to unproven allegations. Hancock Prospecting considers it inappropriate and unfair for The Guardian to publish numerous allegations by John Hancock that relate to or touch upon the various disputes he has instigated in circumstances where it would be improper for Hancock Prospecting to respond on the record, including because the arbitration was and remains confidential.
For John Hancock, his legal battle with his mother has now been going for more than 20 years.
You must have thought a lot about the motivation at play here.
I think it's about control, number one, and power. She also, I think, single child syndrome, if that's a thing. She wants to be the only one recognised, and it's not even about having all the money for herself, I don't think, although that gives her power. It's the power over the money. It's not like she wants the money to go and buy artwork or something. Some other billionaires do that. She's got a jet and things like that, but the company pays for it. So it's not her personally. So what's her motivation? I think control, and that extends everywhere. So she would like to have some control over everyone's destiny. And probably a lot of it she's genuinely believing is the right course of action for Australia, and I believe in a lot of the same things that she's espousing to a degree. And I've never asked for her to not run the companies. And it was the same thing that she had with her father. They had various disputes, and Gina would always say, Lang, you can continue running the companies. And there were a whole series of these disputes, over the decade before he died. But it was also, to give her a salary, to give her money, and Lang would always give her a salary or an income or something, which is, not something that my mother continued. Even though we had disputes, she totally cut me off.
How has it impacted you and your family?
Well, I've done my best to shelter my kids from it. We've moved overseas and have been for more than 10 years. I knew that it wouldn't be a good environment for my kids. They don't seem affected, and they're very happy and live pretty normal lives. They're doing well at school, all the things that a parent could hope for in their children. So that's the main thing for me now. I'm not so worried about my life. It's making sure my children don't have to go through what I have. And yeah, that's a very big battle.
I mean, there's a lot of choices along this road. What has been the sort of familial cost to you in not having your mother in your life?
It's disappointing I don't have a normal mother, perhaps. And that's the disappointment. Sure, there's positives about her. She can be very entertaining company, and I enjoyed many conversations with her. But I think when it doesn't just happen to her, it happens to other people with unlimited money. When they are in that level, they can pick and choose who they want around. And I'm never going to be someone that just says yes and behaves like the puppet. That's not who I am. I'd prefer to have nothing than live that sort of life. Essentially, that's the choice. It's either, if you want to be in her orbit, you have to be a 100% sycophant. There's no choice of disagreement.
Do you ever wish that your children had a relationship with her?
I wish they had one with Lang, and Gina has aspects of Lang and old stories of the family, all those sorts of things I miss, and stories of Lang, stories of the Pilbara, all of that family history I definitely miss. Do I miss the belittlement or the put-downs or the trying to be made weaker? Definitely not. So would they bear any of that? Well, I think she's particularly like that against a male. But the risk of her interfering negatively with my children is such that I'm happier that she's not part of their lives.
In what way did you feel she belittled you?
All sorts of like, oh, isn't my son good looking? But I'm meeting executives, and it's not just a mother. She did it in a purposeful way.
John has a strained relationship with Gina, and he didn't want to talk about his relationship with his dad, Greg. But he was keen to talk about Lang Hancock, the grandfather he's admired since he was a young boy.
Do you feel that he still lives on in you and your approach to life?
It would be impossible not to have that big vision. And he looked, 20 or 30 years ahead and didn't see the obstacles, but he was able to see the big plan and where others couldn't see. There's actually an interesting anecdote that my wife's grandmother said. My wife's grandmother had a station, which was the one that Lang used to fly down to use the coaxial cable to call Japan.
Oh, right.
Right because that was as far as the telephone line went.
Right.
And so he would fly down and visit her there. So yeah, my wife's grandmother had this great anecdote about Lang and his vision for the Pilbara. And of course, this was before there was any mines, there was no railroads, no ports. And she said, Lang, you're either a visionary or a madman. And history proved it was the former.
And do you see yourself as a visionary?
I've gotten involved with some really exciting projects, and they need to have a big vision for me to get excited about them. So I like to think that I've inherited his ability to maybe see the future a little bit. What is the world going to be like in 20 years? What raw materials are they going to need? And that's what I'm doing now, is trying to find those materials. And as he did in the Pilbara, but I'm looking in northern Canada and Germany.
And what about what you've inherited from your mother?
I like to think that through seeing how she is, I've changed for the better. And that was a process that took a while, because obviously I was probably a lot more like her in my early adulthood. And as I've matured, I think I've seen perhaps a bit more empathy.
And what would you say to critics who might listen to this and say, well, you're motivated by revenge or avarice?
Well, I'm motivated by what I see my grandfather's intentions and the way he left things, and that my mother agreed to those intentions and agreed to the reasons for them, and that's been changed.
What do you think you would say if you could see how, I guess, everything's been divided?
I think that provided it wasn't all for Gina, he'd be thrilled, because his dream of an iron ore mine has been developed. You can bring more than just Gina on that development journey that was Lang's dream, and Lang set it all out for her.
Do you have any regrets? Like, have there been times when you thought, I wish I just walked away?
Well, in essence, I sort of have walked away because I'm overseas. That was for my mental health and also for the protection of my children. But, I guess my regret is that I've had to leave my home state and Perth. I've had wonderful experiences elsewhere in the world, and, we're all happy. We're in the UK right now. So I try not to think of any downside or regret. It's an unusual situation that I'm in, and, I hope I don't come across as poor me in any way, because, people have all sorts of battles and difficulties. But I think going through that has probably also made me a better person, to recognise that life isn't always completely perfect or easy. Sadly, especially if you don't have unlimited money in the world. Knowing that my mother's in that position, she can create the world however she wants it. But is that also a good way to live? I'm not so sure.
Next time on Gina, we look at the colonial legacy of Gina's family and her attempts to control her image.
It's beautiful, it's ugly, it's all sorts of things. But those are all inherently a part of how Vincent views Australia.
It's Australia's Mona Lisa now, right? Like, she's...
Yeah, it is, that's right.
But the grimaces, you can't get past the grimace.
There's something slightly uncomfortable about the image, which I think has captured the imagination.
Gina is recorded on Kaurna and Parramac land. It's reported by me, Sarah Martin, and the series producer is Joe Koning. The executive producer is Shelley Hepworth, and the head of audio is Miles Martignoni. This episode was also produced by Luca Idamani, who assisted with research and fact-checking. Additional production was by Miles Herbert. Sound design was by Joe Koning.